This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The US opens a new front in its trade wars, going after trucks and kitchen cabinets, but branded drugs will be the worst hit. A 100% tariff kicks in October 1st, except for firms already building factories in the US. The tussle for TikTok is over. President Trump signs off on a deal to keep the app alive. U.S. investors will take an 80% stake with a new company valued at $14 billion. And China's Premier Li Qiang set to take the stage at the UN, with everyone listening to hear how he describes current relations with the U.S. as trade talks intensify. And South Korea's ousted President Yoon Suk-yeol denies all charges, including obstruction, as he formally stands trial weeks after boycotting proceedings on health grounds. A warm handshake after years of frosty relations. China calls its relationship with India the dance of the elephant and the dragon. But some in New Delhi are asking, can the dragon stop breathing fire? Asia is bracing for another set of tariffs announced by the U.S. President Donald Trump is now taking aim at pharmaceuticals, big rig trucks and furniture, the latest step in his global trade war. A punishing set of tariffs is the harshest trade policy by the president since last April's shock rollout of reciprocal tariffs on its trading partners. And Mr. Trump says the U.S. will impose 100% tariffs on imports of branded or patented pharmaceutical products unless the company is building a drug manufacturing plant in America. He clarified that the tariff will not apply if construction of the facility has started. The announcement opens new fronts in President Trump's trade agenda and adds fresh uncertainty for global pharmaceutical companies. The new tariff rate will start to take effect from the 1st of October. And some analysts see limited impact on many Asian drug makers due to their focus on generics drugs, especially in China and India. Now, UN Comtrade data shows that around 60% of U.S. pharmaceutical imports last year came from the EU, and the EU says it had secured a 15% ceiling on U.S. tariffs on pharmaceuticals. Now, we spoke with Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Henrik Foundation earlier, and she told us what countries and companies could be affected by the tariffs.
I think it's a little unclear because of the way the Trump administration has at least appears to be framing this, because you'll need to look at not just which products are imported from abroad that are branded, not generics, but also are those firms producing products domestically, even if it's not the same product. It's a little unclear, right? So if I make product A domestically but not product B, can I just declare my full line of pharmaceuticals are therefore exempt from this tariff? It's still unclear. But there are some products that are clearly going to be an issue. For example, Ozempic and Wegovy, which are the weight loss drugs, are currently all imported. There is a discussion about making them domestically. It hasn't happened yet. That could be a problem. Viagra, as I understand it, is 100% imported. There are generic substitutes that are available that would be zero tariffs. And so there'll be some really interesting consequences from this decision should it go forward next week.
Meantime, U.S. President Donald Trump has approved a plan to sell TikTok's American operations to American and global investors. He signed an executive order saying that the agreement meets a law that requires TikTok's Chinese owners to sell it.
But we have American investors taking it over, running it, highly sophisticated, including Larry Ellison. And Oracle, I guess, is going to play a very big role in terms of security, safety, and everything else. So we have very good controls. And literally, I would get a call from friends of mine who were fathers of young people saying, could you do me a favor? Could you get it approved, please? My son is driving me crazy.
Vice President J.D. Vance, who was heavily involved in discussions, said that the new U.S. company will be valued at around $14 billion, but no purchase price was mentioned. The Chinese government has not publicly announced an approval of the deal, but Mr. Trump says he spoke to President Xi Jinping about the deal and was told to go ahead. Nick Harper reports for CNA from Washington, D.C. on the new American owners of the app's U.S. operations.
It will be a majority-owned and controlled business, we're told. Now, the exact details and the exact list of companies is still being worked out. There are several things that need to be finalised. It needs to jump through several legal hoops and, importantly, needs to get regulatory approval. But for now, it's believed that it'll be made up from three firms in particular: the cloud computing firm Oracle, the private equity firm Silver Lake Management, and the Abu Dhabi-based investment company MGX. Now, they will reportedly take about a 15% share each of this new company. So add that up, gets to about 45%, less than 50% for those three companies. The current owner, ByteDance, and all of its affiliates, we're told, will be owning substantially less, anywhere potentially between 20 and 30% of the new company, according to various reports. Donald Trump also mentioned Oracle's co-founder by name, Larry Ellison, saying that he would play a big role in this new company. And he mentioned the tech entrepreneur Michael Dell and the media mogul Rupert Murdoch, but no word yet exactly on how they, and in particular Rupert Murdoch, will be involved in all of this. And the Vice President, J.D. Vance, says this is a big deal, valuing the new company at around $14 billion.
For more insights, let's bring in George Chan, partner and co-chair of digital practice at the Asia Group, and my business colleague Henry is also joining this conversation this evening. So George, thanks for joining us. Help us understand the big picture, right? We've got the TikTok deal on one hand, we've got new U.S. tariffs on pharma imports on the other hand. How do you see these moves actually fit together? I mean, are they separate issues or just part of a broader strategy in how Washington and Beijing plan to negotiate?
Thanks for having me tonight. I think this is just the new normal you have to deal with, during Trump 2.0. A lot of people said, well, after, the Trump and Xi call last week, things could start to stabilize a little bit. And then Trump caught everyone by surprise in terms of the new tariff on drugs. Even though, I think, as you mentioned, earlier, the impact on, Chinese exports in terms of drugs, by absolute number in terms of the money volume, won't be that big, compared with, other sectors. On the other side, I think Trump must be in happy mood, because the TikTok deal can be considered a win, and maybe a small win, as part of the broader, U.S.-China, negotiations. The Chinese side probably, consider, well, TikTok, is something, President Xi is apparently willing to give, compared with other things, probably, be more difficult to negotiate. I think this is all part of, the negotiation tactics. After Trump is happy, the Chinese side will also make their wish list. So we will see what the next round of, talk in Frankfurt will be like.
Yeah, so George, I mean, you said Mr. Trump, maybe it's a small win for him there, but, I want to talk about Beijing's point of view there, because they gave the green light, but, it was in carefully vague terms, because they're stressing that it is still subject to Chinese law. So how do you interpret this ambiguity, and what does it say about China's strategy here?
Right. I believe we can consider this as a done deal, but Beijing, of course, wants to do something for face reasons, particularly for the domestic audience, right? If you think about this, a year ago, it's almost impossible, to think, President Xi will give nod to the deal, given, there's a lot of, pro-nationalism people saying, how can we sort of bow to the, pressure, in the U.S., to allow U.S. just take control, even though just the U.S. part of TikTok. But now the narrative is changing. If you pay attention to the details, the Chinese side has made it very clear that the Chinese side will agree to license the algorithm, to the U.S. investors. This is not a tech transfer deal. And then the narrative domestically in China is trying to make the Chinese audience, domestic audience, feel proud. Look, like 10 years ago, you were not thinking about how can the U.S. investors will be interested in Chinese technology. So I think that the Chinese government trying to position the story as the rise of Chinese technologies, and even American investors now want to acquire to make Chinese people more proud. But on the other side, this is also part of the negotiations. After Chinese government look at all the possible bargains, this is something they are willing to offer for now.
Well, George, we've been seeing that the deal has been dragging for so long. So is TikTok simply too big to ban? And this could set, a precedent where governments feel emboldened to reshape foreign companies under national security?
Yeah, so the whole situation, as you said, it's been dragging for so long. But I think Trump also realized, and frankly, a lot of people, in the Republican camp probably also realize, if you ban TikTok like really like a block TikTok, you probably will lose a lot of young voters and who won't be happy with just a simple decision to kill the app. And Trump actually made it also very clear, part of the reason he really want to make the deal is to make the young users happy. And then those users, if you think about a few years later, will be, the voters, who can, have big impact, on, the next president and the future politics in the U.S. So it will be interesting, to see, after, TikTok US is, taken over by a bunch of new, investors, how the platform will go. And also, if you think about algorithm, the algorithm is not like something, just there, like unchanged. You get algorithm licensed from the Chinese side now, and the algorithm will learn, from, user behavior and everything. Like 1 year later, the algorithm, compared with today will be very different. So it very much also depends on how, the new management will, do content moderation, measure the algorithm, this and that. So TikTok will remain a very important tool in terms of political influence in the U.S.
So, I mean, as we see, what follows up and happens from here, at the heart of it all is still the data, right? So how do you see the role of data evolving as a currency of geopolitical power?
I think the U.S. government, even from President Biden's era, now Trump, made it very clear. The bottom line is, there's no way like the Chinese government should have any kind of access to American user data. So this is a core issue of the whole TikTok situation. And then now the Oracle offer is basically, to take over, the data control. And sounds like, Trump is happy with it, even though, some people will argue, well, there will be still like some national security concern, given like Biden still, remain as a minority shareholder. On the Chinese side, they repeatedly said, we are not interested in data, believe it or not. So, both sides are actually speaking the same thing, and now they can finally reach a result, for the U.S. part to take over the U.S. asset of TikTok, including the data control. So it sounds like they will get this issue resolved, but. Here's the thing, there will be some noises, still, from the Congress, whether some of the members of Congress will be happy with the arrangement or not, that will be a different story. But I think on the Chinese side, this is almost like a done deal. They are like you take over it, and I'm not going to touch on it.
All right, some great analysis there. Thanks so very much, George Chen, co-chair of digital practice at the Asia Group. And I will be catching up with Henry a little later for more business news. Turning our attention now to parts of East Asia, still reeling from the effects of a weaker Typhoon Ragasa, which devastated the region this week. In Taiwan, authorities are racing to find 11 people still missing after catastrophic flooding in Hualien. Well, at least 14 people were killed after a barrier lake burst its banks on Tuesday.
我现在就准备走了，我要跟谁聊天？怎么走的？是呀，一到尸体。
Emergency workers have been wading through muddy waters to find survivors as relatives of the missing grow increasingly desperate. President William Lai has called for repairs to be completed within a month, promising to provide heavy equipment and more manpower to help the hardest hit areas.
中央会请全力来帮助花莲，跟花莲的乡亲站在一起，包括救灾、复原复建，然后让民众迅速恢复正常的生活。
Southern China is also recovering from the storm's lashing. The storm left thick mud, fallen trees and debris in Guangdong. Businesses in the city of Zhuhai are attempting to offset heavy losses by salvaging products damaged by flash floods.
来这里10几年都没这么厉害过，以为这些凳子一叠高就叠高一点就没事，现在都泡过我们想象的，泡到这里来呀，全部叠这么高都没用啊。 昨天你看，都泡到这里嘛。
哦，这个心真的很难受，无法用言语表达这个，真的是。
Ragasa, which is now approaching Vietnam, has been downgraded by 3 levels from a super typhoon. Despite its weakening, authorities warn that it could still bring heavy rain and floods to northern Vietnam over the next few days. Breaks up next, but coming up on East Asia tonight, another Chinese firm eyes a Hong Kong IPO, autonomous driving startup Momenta, as US-China tensions simmer. More on the potential size of the offer coming up. And the European Commission is reportedly looking to slap new tariffs on Chinese steel and related products in the coming week. Hello again. You are watching East Asia tonight, and as promised, Henry Yin is back with us for more business news. And we're just talking about pharmaceutical companies. They have been hit hard by Donald Trump's new tariffs.
Yes, indeed. Investors are rattled, in your words, Telly. So we are seeing a broad sell-off across Asia and Europe after President Trump announced 100% tariffs on imports of branded drugs from next month. Well, in the Tokyo market, Chugai Pharmaceutical led the sector's poor performance and ended the day lower by nearly 5%. While the country's number 2 drug maker, Otsuka Holdings, declined 3%, while shares in Sumitomo and Daiichi Sankyo also fell. In Seoul, top drug makers like Yuhan, Daewon and Zhongguotang Pharmaceuticals all slid around 3%. Well, the slump is part of a broader sell-off gripping drug makers from Australia to India and Europe. Well, India's Nifty Pharma Index and Hang Seng's Pharmaceuticals and Biotechnology Index fell around 2%. And shares of Jiangsu Hengrui Pharmaceuticals, one of China's largest generic drug makers, dropped more than 4% at one point. While Australian biotechnology giant CSL, one of the largest companies on the country's exchange, ended the day 2% in the red after dropping around 3.6%. Well, losses in pharma dampening investor confidence on the last trading day of the week. Now, key indices pulled back but ended the week near their highest levels in 3.5 years as investors remained upbeat on growing confidence in China's artificial intelligence potential. Shanghai Composite Index ending the day down by 0.6%, while Shenzhen Component Index off by about 1.8%, and Hang Seng down by less than 1.5%. Now, shares of China's top car exporter Chery Auto, following its Hong Kong debut yesterday, up by 2.8%. The company raised $1.2 billion in one of the territory's biggest IPOs this year. President Trump's sweeping trade war and fast-changing trade policy has kept markets on edge. And Ed Gomes of SGMC Capital tells us what the latest tariff announcement signals about Washington's long-term strategy.
Our belief is that, for the next 3 years, while Donald Trump is president, this is his style, this is his approach, and there is no general way around from that. The only way around is to do deals with him, both as individual companies, as well as collective industry groups, as well as countries and blocs, because that's the only way you're going to get some ability to leverage your situation with him. The larger the collective, obviously, the more the bargaining power. But Donald Trump knows the power of the U.S. economy, the power of the U.S. consumer, the size of that market, and the number of people who are flocking to the U.S. to sell their goods and services. And he's leveraging that to the hilt. Overall, bad news in the short term. because it's hard to, 350 million people. And it's a fairly lucrative market, especially when you're talking about pharmaceuticals. But overall, you'll have to take that pain on and work your way through this. It's evident and it's clear that Donald Trump is open to negotiation, on his terms, of course, but each country is going to have to push for that advantage the best they can. It's not an easy job for sure.
Chinese autonomous driving startup Momenta is considering shifting its IPO to Hong Kong from New York next year. The latest Chinese company possibly opting to debut in the Asian financial hub amid US-China tensions. This comes as the approval by China's securities regulator to list in the US, which was granted mid-last year, expired in June. But details of the IPO, including the listing venue, are yet to be finalized. Hong Kong, fueled by the influx of Chinese companies amid heightened trade tensions between China and the US, has emerged as the top global bourse by volume of IPOs and second listings combined so far this year. Total funds raised in Hong Kong are about $20 billion so far this year, exceeding $11.3 billion in all of 2024. By contrast, Chinese companies have raised just $776 million through initial and second listings in the US so far this year. Backed by Temasek, Tencent, and Jack Ma's Yunfeng Capital, Momenta's advanced driving assisted system features are used by global brands such as Toyota and Audi in China. It's seeking to raise new funds at above $5 billion and is currently working with advisors to gauge interest from potential investors. The European Union is planning to sharply ramp up its trade defenses against China in the coming weeks, reportedly considering steep tariffs aimed at protecting the region's struggling steel industry. According to local media, the bloc is preparing to impose tariffs of between 25% and 50% on Chinese steel and related products. The move could come within weeks. The Commission has not commented publicly on the report, and Beijing's Ministry of Commerce has yet to respond. And EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has flagged plans for a new long-term trade instrument to curb imports. She has raised concerns over global oversupply squeezing margins and making it harder for Europe's steelmakers to invest in decarbonization. Analysts say the tariffs would have only a limited impact on China's steel industry, since exports to the EU represent just about 4% of total overseas shipments. Brussels also tightening monitoring of scrap metal imports as smelters warn of shortages and rising pressure on the bloc's green transition. Zijin Mining, the parent company of Zijin Gold, which is gearing up for a 3.2 billion Hong Kong dollar IPO next week, is enjoying a boom period for gold. Its Hong Kong-listed shares are trading near a record premium over those in the mainland as foreign investors rush to buy its stocks. Zijin's shares have jumped around 117% so far this year in Hong Kong, eclipsing the 86% rise in its mainland-listed stocks. The recent rally pushing its market value above $100 billion this week, helping it join the big leagues of metal miners like Rio Tinto and BHP. While spot gold now at $3,753 per ounce. It has climbed 1.6% so far this week. U.S. e-commerce giant Amazon is set to pay $2.5 billion in fines and reimbursements for allegedly deceiving customers to generate subscriptions. $1.5 billion of that go to paying around 35 million Prime customers. Another $1 billion will be paid as a fine to the U.S. FTC. The company did not admit any wrongdoing, but as part of the deal, it will create a clear button to allow customers to decline a Prime subscription and make it easier to cancel. The settlement is the second largest amount ever for an FTC action. It's also seen as a major win for the regulator's push to rein in tech giants. FTC Chair Andrew Ferguson called it a monumental win for Americans who are tired of deceptive subscriptions that feel impossible to cancel. And former FTC Chair Lina Khan, who filed this case, called the $2.5 billion settlement a drop in the bucket for Amazon. Well, the company makes that amount in sales every 33 hours. shares fell by about 1%. And that's all for business. Oteli, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Henry. Well, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Chinese President Xi Jinping is not speaking to the UN General Assembly at its 80th anniversary year. Premier Li Qiang instead will be taking the podium. Our correspondent will have more on what to expect. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. U.S. President Donald Trump opens a new front in his tariff war, going after trucks and kitchen cabinets, but branded drugs will be worst hit, getting a 100% tariff from October 1st. And a TikTok deal is settled. The U.S. president also signed off on a deal that has U.S. investors taking an 80% share of the $14 billion company. And China's Premier Li Qiang is set to take the podium at the United Nations later tonight, at a time when Beijing remains locked in trade negotiations with Washington. Singapore and South Korea are stepping up healthcare cooperation, signing a new agreement on the sidelines of a United Nations General Assembly meeting. Singapore Health Minister Ong Ye Kung says that the country is committed to working with like-minded nations to tackle major health challenges such as cancer and diabetes.
Whatever our collective action, we should always keep faith and focus on science and evidence. While rigorous debate is inherent in science, nonetheless, science is an established common language for the world to engage and advance healthcare together. With digital technology and the proliferation of healthcare AI use cases, we can leverage data and empirical evidence to deliver better health outcomes.
Staying with the United Nations, Chinese President Xi Jinping will not be addressing the General Assembly at its 80th anniversary year. The leader has sent Premier Li Qiang for the job, and he's set to speak later tonight. Well, CNA's Deborah Wong, she joins us live from Shenzhen. So, Deborah, US and China presenting vastly different stances on multilateralism. We've got the US announcing more tariffs, calling climate change a con job, and then you've got China going the other direction. So, in a nutshell, what does this say about China's ambitions?
I think we've got to look at what China announced sometime earlier this month. You know, they announced this framework called the Global Governance Initiative. Premier Li Qiang in New York this week reiterating that stance, explaining what that framework is about, and essentially saying that aligns with the UN's approach to multilateralism of building a just global governance system. You know, not just a global governance system, but one that really goes out to invest more time and resources to support developing nations. So in a way, observers are saying that this signals that China is ready to play a bigger role, you know, in counterbalancing the US-led hegemony. But it is stopping short at going all in. You know, it doesn't want to position itself as reshaping, as a leader to reshape the world order. In fact, analysts are saying that China doesn't want to shoulder the burden of being a global leader because it still sees itself as a developing country. Now, one development to take note of this week was that China announced that it would no longer be seeking special and differential treatments under the World Trade Organization. And, you know, Li Qiang said that China is forgoing those benefits because it sees itself as a responsible developing nation. And the U.S. had long argued that China's rights to these benefits gives them quite an unfair advantage. And so this is one way China seems to be evening out the playing field. You know, we spoke to an analyst earlier on what this means for China's status in the world order. Have a listen.
And if you travel to China, to other places of China, you will still see a lot of poor people, you know, their living conditions are miserable. On the other hand, China realized that economic strengths have been huge, right? Its power is growing. So it's time for China to pay back. That's why China started to, for example, unilaterally promise the removal of tariffs for imported items from the poorest countries of the world. It wants to create more opportunities, development opportunities for other developing countries.
Now, Deborah, China and India, they've held separate meetings with Global South countries this week. What should we read into?
So, some observers are saying that this signals that both India and China are vying for dominance to lead the Global South. Both sides are talking trade, they're talking deeper partnerships and investments as well. But it's also worth noting that China and India are still trying to repair their relationship after years of, tensions brought on by deadly border disputes. We saw, again, President Xi Jinping meeting with Modi in the Tianjin summit in SCO earlier this month, and both of them trying to re-establish ties. They were talking about having a shared history. They were talking about working together to, promote peace at the border regions, re-establish business exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, as well as direct flights. So we're also seeing that the remarks coming out of both nations, pledging to contribute more to the Global South together. So there will be, unlikely, I think, an outright fight for dominance in this aspect because they're still trying to rebuild a relationship. Now, I spoke to Professor Duan again on what this means for both relationships and what this means for Global South countries. Have a listen.
The Global South countries really value their national autonomy of action, their sovereign independence. What they want most is not leadership, but more resources, more actions from outside, more help from outside. China's global presence nowadays is primarily transactional in nature. India's economic strengths and domestic political constraints may hinder its efforts to lead the Global South countries. So together, I think, let's forget the leadership. Let's do something that really helps the Global South countries.
Well, all eyes will be on Chinese Premier Li Qiang, who is scheduled to speak this evening. So, Deborah, what can we expect?
I think chief on the agenda is most likely going to be about fair trade, about multilateralism, about working with other countries and not shutting them out, given the destabilizing tariffs launched by the US. Now, Li Qiang could reiterate China's stance on cooperation, being open to the rest of the world, perhaps talking about some economic reforms, some trade policies. We see that again in the example of China's climate policies that President Xi talked about earlier this week. Vowing to cut emissions by at least 7 to 10% by 2035. It's not just climate that we're talking about, because this could also, impact how China does business with other countries, perhaps restructuring certain green energies, certain green sectors or agreements that they have with other trade partners. Now, we may also see China offer proposals on, peaceful resolution, especially in the ongoing Ukraine and Gaza conflicts. China has repeatedly called for more dialogue on multiple multilateral platforms. I think especially as this time round, this week, we're seeing more nations formally recognizing a Palestinian state, which China has already done so since 1988. So we may again see China use that same narrative, right on that wave to double down on calls against bullying, against coercion, and therefore aligning itself with the third world, positioning itself as a strong supporter, once again, of developing economies. Ateli.
Hey, many thanks for that report. CNA's Deborah Wong speaking to us from Shenzhen. Now, in other news, the first formal trial of ousted South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol opened in Seoul today, with prosecutors pursuing new charges tied to last year's martial law crisis. The former president once again denied all charges. It was Yoon's first public appearance in more than 2 months. The 64-year-old had refused to attend trial since early July, citing health reasons. He has missed 11 hearings in a separate insurrection case. In this latest trial, Yoon is accused of obstructing official duties and abusing his power when he allegedly interfered with an arrest warrant and violated cabinet members' rights during emergency rule. If convicted, the former president could face a lengthy prison term. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China calls its relationship with India the dance of the elephant and the dragon, and there are signs the two are getting closer. And experts say there are tripping points. Cost of living, immigration and public trust. These are some of the key issues that have emerged as Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party prepares to elect its leader a week tomorrow. 5 candidates are campaigning to succeed Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, who's stepping down after a string of electoral defeats. CNA's Micho Ishida reports from Tokyo.
The successor to Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba will have to find a way to tackle rising cost of living, which analysts say was the key factor behind the ruling party's defeat in the recent upper house election. The Liberal Democratic Party has so far resisted calls to slash the consumption tax. This is set at 10%, or a reduced rate of 8% for some items such as groceries. Depending on who wins, that might change.
食料品っていうのも皆様が必要なものでございますので、その食料品に関しては軽減税率を一度ゼロにする、こういった取り組みができないだろうか。
But there are concerns a reduction could impact financing for Japan's social welfare system.
ポストベビーブーマー世代が今から後期高齢者になっていくという、こういうある意味では上り坂にまだいるということであります。
Most candidates opposed an earlier pledge by the LDP to provide uniform cash handouts. Instead, they proposed other measures to promote real wage growth and combat inflation, such as lowering the petrol tax, reducing social insurance premiums, and implementing income tax breaks. Besides bread and butter issues, concerns over an influx of foreigners have also surfaced. The number of foreign residents in Japan jumped to more than 3.6 million in April, up more than 10% from the same period last year, according to official data.
外国人の不法就労や地域住民との圧力、治安の悪化などにより地域住民の不安につながっている現実があります。さらにオーバーツーリズムの問題、外国人が不動産を買い漁っているのではないかとのご指摘。一つずつ問題を解決していく必要があると考えています。
The candidates, who mostly position themselves as moderate conservatives, will be scrutinized for their views on immigration. That's especially since the opposition party Sansei-to gained ground in the upper house polls on the back of its anti-immigrant stance. But even more so, candidates will need to show their ability to win back public trust, following voter backlash over scandals related to LDP's mishandling of political funds that surfaced in 2022. Some observers say they are not doing enough to address this.
岸田政権で一度処分をし、そして石破政権になった直後、衆議院の解散あったときに、公認非公認の話ありましたが、追加の処分があった。その後衆議院の総選挙、参議院選挙があって、そうしたところで、審判を受けてきたわけです。
Having lost its majority in both chambers of parliament, the LDP will need backing from the opposition to push through policies. How the candidates plan to cooperate with the opposition has been a focus during campaigning. A possibility mooted is expanding the current LDP-Komeito coalition, such as by partnering the Japan Innovation Party or Democratic Party for the People.
手順から言いますと、その政策の優先順位を決めて政策の一致を見ると、場合によっては閣外協力なのか、それとも連立なのかという話はあると思います。
There are precedents of the LDP aligning itself with the opposition in its 70-year history. Before joining hands with Komeito in 1999, it partnered with the Socialist Party, then its main opponent, to form a coalition government in 1994. Observers say expanding its coalition is one way the LDP can show the public the party is serious about internal reform. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Chinese President Xi Jinping's recent meeting and handshake with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is being seen as a sign of Asia's 2 largest economies coming together. Beijing calls it the dance of the elephant and the dragon. But several roadblocks remain in this diplomatic thaw. Ishan Garg files this report for CNA from New Delhi.
It's a handshake that seemed to mark a new beginning after years of diplomatic frostiness.
the sight of the leaders of India and China sharing a warm moment at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit sent a strong signal around the world and rang alarm bells in Washington. In the US, criticism is mounting that the Trump administration's punitive tariffs on India are pushing it into China's orbit. Officials are seeking to calm nerves.
We are on the track of resolving that. Our relationship with the Indian government, with the people of India, extends many more decades, and it's a much warmer relationship than they have with the Chinese. Frankly, they are concerned by Chinese expansionism.
For now, the elephant and the dragon appear to be in a slow dance. A month on from that late August meeting in Tianjin, both countries have yet to resume direct flights, further delaying a much-anticipated boost to local tourism. India also has yet to relax its investment rules for Chinese companies, even as both New Delhi and Beijing declared that they would rather be partners than competitors. And despite hopes by New Delhi that it would now have easier access to specialty fertilizers for high-value crops and rare earth minerals for its electric vehicle industry, Beijing's export controls remain firmly in place. At the center of this fluctuating relationship is a decades-long border dispute that turned into deadly conflict in the Himalayan Galwan Valley in 2020. Former Indian ambassador Rajiv Dogra has written about major world powers and their strategic choices. He tells CNA that despite recent border talks, mutual distrust runs deep, with continued military deployment along the 3,400-kilometer-long frontier.
China has to realize that its long-term interests do not lie in confrontation. If it says elephant and dragon must tango together, then dragon should stop breathing fire.
India too has not backed down, instead stepping up infrastructure development near the contested areas. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is spending $3.4 billion to build roads, railways and bridges in the border regions, partly to improve the local economy, but also to facilitate troop movements should war break out. Ambassador Dogra says China's geopolitical ambitions complicate ties further.
And India is the only country in Asia which is a match for China at the very top of the Asian summit. So that is one. Second is, even in terms of the global leadership, China hopes one day to replace America, or if not replace America, to stand on an equal footing as one of the two superpowers of the world.
Publicly, China has been vocal in its support for India. Its ambassador in New Delhi has repeatedly criticized the 50% Trump tariffs on India, urging closer economic ties. But observers say that's because the $99 billion bilateral trade currently leans in Beijing's favor. Srikanth Kondapalli, professor of China studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, adds that China is likely eyeing better access to the Indian market.
There are 400 million consumers in India. So China would like to sell its BYD, the electric vehicle. It also would like to sell its AI-generated systems, DeepSeek, or various other new gadgets they are coming in.
During Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Delhi in August, both sides agreed to form an expert group to resolve the border issue. But analysts believe the process could take months, if not years, meaning while both sides might not consider each other as enemies for now, a friendship remains elusive. For CNA, I'm Ishan Garg in New Delhi.
The U.S. crackdown on the H-1B visa is shaking things up for highly educated foreign workers. But American businesses are also bracing for impact. Many fear that the move to protect American jobs could ultimately hurt their interests. Nick Harper felt this report for CNA from Washington, D.C.
We'll be able, sort of like a signing bonus in baseball or football, a corporation will be able to get them to stay in the country.
Donald Trump wants the best of the best, but at a price, $100,000 to be exact. That's the new fee companies have to pay to bring in each high-skilled foreign worker.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the captain speaking.
The presidential proclamation has created panic. In San Francisco last weekend, a flight was delayed as passengers left.
We are aware that a number of passengers do not wish to travel with us.
Fearing the latest rules would prevent them from re-entering the United States. Chintan Patel is the executive director of the civic organisation Indian American Impact and has been contacted by visa holders confused about what it means for them.
What we heard a lot was sort of this flurry of conversation within the community about whether they should continue with their travel plans, whether how quickly they need to come back if they were abroad. So just, again, this uncertainty was really kind of palpable.
Since 1990, H-1B visas have enabled companies to hire high-skilled foreign workers. The tech sector in particular has benefited, sponsoring nearly two-thirds of H-1B workers in the last decade. Experts now predict startups will suffer, unable to afford the $100,000 fee to bring in talent, while the tech giants with much deeper pockets will be able to cherry-pick talent, whatever the cost. Santosh Rao is partner and head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners.
At a very high level, when it's very talented guys, they will have, Google will find them. Google, Microsoft, all the big guys who have the money, they will find them down the line with solid pipeline of talent. That's going to be difficult. It's going to lead to a lot of offshoring. Like all these people will say, you know what, it's just not worth it. I can't take this on, off, 100,000 here, 100,000 there.
More than 70% of H-1B visas issued last year went to Indian workers. Santosh Rao grew up in India and understands the compulsion for people to search for work in the US. He believes Trump's rules may mark a turning point.
US is the big loser in this equation. This thing is going to force India to realize that, hey, we have to do something. Why are we depending on other people? Why can't we just do it here, create the environment? And that's what China is doing as well. Also, they're creating their own visa system for, talent, just like the H-1 system here.
From the start of October, Beijing will offer a new K visa to attract talented STEM workers. The White House argues the new rules will protect American workers, but critics predict they will in fact destabilize US businesses, dilute innovation and weaken US competitiveness, all while increasing offshoring and pushing high-skilled workers to look elsewhere, the very things the program was designed to prevent. Some American Indians also have a larger concern for the communities affected.
In reality, it's sort of like racism and hate that's being dressed up as economic populism. Ultimately, it's not going to help American families. It's not going to help our competitiveness. It's not going to help bring down costs of living.
The new policies, expected to kick in next year, are likely to face court challenges, with immigration experts pointing out that Congress, not the president, would traditionally set visa fees. For CNA, I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C.
And that wraps up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. Thanks for watching.